All right, welcome to chapter 14. We're going to talk about the digestive system and metabolism. With this particular chapter, I'll spend a little bit of time talking about the digestive system, at least the anatomical overview of it, and then I'll spend a little bit more time talking about how the digestive system works and metabolism and those kinds of things. The good news is we've talked about some of this stuff already, so this chapter should be a little easier to swallow, pardon the pun. But we've talked about some of the things that are in this chapter already, and the reason why is when I talked about them earlier, it was a better place to talk about them than waiting until here, because it would provide us a greater understanding of it than waiting until now to begin to try to understand that. So anyway, some of this stuff will be familiar. Some of this stuff will be new, obviously. And in the hopes to try to get through this lecture in under 2 hours, I know we would all be happy about that. I'm going to move kind of fast through part of it, and then I'll slow up, and then I may speed up again and kind of slow down again. So just kind of be prepared for that. So digestive system functions, of course. Ingestion, we take in food, we digest food, we break it down, absorb it into the bloodstream, and then get rid of all the indigestible things through a process called defecation. Two main groups of organs involved with the digestive system. The first group is the alimentary canal, which is all the gastrointestinal stuff, all the GI tract. And it's from start to finish, from mouth to exit. And then, of course, there's some accessory digestive organs such as the teeth, the tongue, other large digestive organs such as the liver, and pancreas plays a little role in there too. So here's the digestive system. That's just a picture of all of it. We're going to talk about all those little things in there. So alimentary canal is continuous, start to finish, includes the stomach, but it starts at the mouth. We have the mouth, the pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestines, large intestines, and anus, where it all ends. So it's one continuous thing, and that's what we call the alimentary canal. That's what we're going to talk about first. First, we'll talk a little bit about some of the anatomy of it, then we'll get into some of the physiology of it, which is really kind of where the rubber meets the road. But you do need to know the anatomy of this too. So just because I may kind of gloss over this a little bit, doesn't mean that I don't want you to know where things are located in the body, what they're called, and those types of things. But those are things that me standing in here or talking to you in a video is not how you're going to learn what those are and where those are. That's going to take some work on your part. So you're going to need to know the anatomy, but you're going to have to work on that on your own. I'm just going to talk about it here just a little bit, and then we're going to move on to bigger stuff. Okay, so the anatomy of the mouth, of course, it's called the oral cavity. It's got a mucous membrane that lines that cavity. And then we've got lips, often called, the technical term for them are labia. They protect the opening of the mouth. We've got cheeks that form the walls of the mouth. We've got a hard palate that's made out of bone, a soft palate at the back that's not made out of bone, and we have a uvula, is that little fleshy projection at the back of the soft palate. I have no idea what it's for, but it is there. So probably part of the defense system, I'm sure. Also, we have a vestibule, which is space between the lips and the external teeth and gums internally. We have an oral cavity, which is that inside part that has where our teeth are located, also where our tongue is. And then we have our tongue. And also down in there, a little bit further down, we have that hyoid bone. We've talked about that earlier. All of them, these things are in the part of what we consider part of the mouth. And of course the tonsils, they make another appearance, the palatine and lingual tonsils that we talked about in the endocrine system. When we talked about that system, they're back. This is a little better view of them, actually. We can see them located there at the back, at the base of the tongue, and we can see the epiglottis there. That's the oral cavity of the mouth. That's what we're talking about right there. See the uvula hanging down back there. Functions, of course, the functions of the mouth is for mastication of food. A great term. Please don't get that term confused with other terms that may sound similar. It would be quite embarrassing to refer to that in this manner. So mastication is just the process of chewing food, and that's what it does. And then the tongue mixes that masticated food with saliva to begin the breakdown process, also to lubricate that food so that we can swallow it. The tongue is going to initiate swallowing, and then the taste buds on the tongue allow for taste. All right, so that whole process is designed to get food into the digestive tract, more importantly, into the stomach. This is the beginning process of us being able to break down this food. So now in order to get the food from A to B, now we need to get it into the stomach to really begin breaking down the things that we're eating so that the nutrients can be absorbed out of them. So we chew it all up, swallow it down. It goes down the oral pharynx, past the laryngopharynx, and into the esophagus where it is carried on down. So the pharynx, of course, serves as a passageway for food, liquids, and air. Remember, it does dual purpose, and we have the epiglottis that protects the air passage when we take in food or water. And of course, the food is pushed along to the esophagus by a couple of skeletal muscle layers. We have the longitudinal muscles and the circular outer layer of muscles that kind of push that along. We'll look at it here in just a second. And alternating contractions of these muscles creates what's called or referred to as peristalsis, or the movement of that propel the food. It's kind of like a wave on an ocean, the way that it pushes the food down through there. So it's like a wave of muscle contraction going down the length of the esophagus. So when we look at the esophagus, it's about 10 inches long. It runs from the pharynx to the top of the stomach, to the opening of the stomach, through the diaphragm. So the esophagus, it takes up that length where the heart and lungs are to get the food down to where it needs to be so that the digestion process can happen. There's not enough room in the chest cavity for the stomach, so it has to be in the abdominal cavity. So now we need a way to get the food from point A to point B, and that is the esophagus that carries that food down there. That is its sole purpose, is to move food from the mouth to the stomach. So that's all it does. So that's its sole purpose in life. Sorry, I was reading this slide, making sure I wasn't missing something. Some of the tissues associated with the alimentary canal organs. There's 4 layers from the innermost to the outermost. There's a mucosa, which is that innermost layer. We call it a mucosa layer because it's slippery, usually contains some sort of a mucus, at least to a degree, to help kind of move things along. Then a submucosa layer, which just means a layer below the mucus layer. Then the muscularis externa, which is a muscular layer, and then serosa. And this kind of breaks down what each one of those are. Like I said, the mucosa is the innermost moist layer, and it lines, it's also, oftentimes we can refer to that as lumen. You know, when we're talking about blood vessels, we talked about that innermost membrane. We called it a lumen. It's basically the equivalent of that, only the alimentary canal version of it. We call the mucosa. Submucosa is just beneath the mucosa. That's why it's called sub. And it's just that connective tissue, blood vessels, nerve endings, those kinds of things, and even some lymphoid tissue that's in that submucosa. And then we have a muscular layer. It contains smooth muscles, so it's smooth muscles, so we don't control it. It's not voluntary. It's got an inner layer, inner circular layer, and an outer longitudinal layer of smooth muscles, and that's what gives us that peristalsis effect, that wave-like effect pushing the food through the digestive tract. And then we've got the outermost layer, or the serosa. It contains these fluid-producing cells. We have the innermost layer that's continuous with the outermost layers of visceral peritoneum, and the parietal peritoneum is the outermost. Anyway, this is the layer, the serosa is the layer that contains those fluid-producing cells, and what that means is like the hydrochloric acid and all those kinds of things that break down food and do all those kinds of things. So So that's that serosa layer. So when we look at it, we can see a cross section of it here, and what all of those layers look like, and we can see that the outermost layer of that, the serosa layer, is not very thick layer, and it's kind of like the membrane that separates the heart from the lungs, the ones that separate those. It's similar to that type of a membrane, but there's also some activities that are going on in that area too. There are a couple of nerve plexus associated with the alimentary canal. There's a submucosal nerve plexus and a myelenteric nerve plexus. These regulate the mobility and the secretion activity of the digestive organs. I'm not going to test you on this. I'm not going to put a question in there about needing to know the names of both of these. But you just need to be aware of the fact that the digestive system is regulated there's some nerves that actually regulate some of the activities of the digestive system. Now, that's not all that regulates the activity. Like many systems in the body, there can be chemicals that regulate it and different things like that. So just need to be aware that it all is attached. The stomach, of course, probably a fairly recognizable organ by everybody, but it's a C-shaped organ, and it says C-shaped, but it's kind of C-shaped, I guess, left side of the abdominal cavity predominantly. It's kind of in the middle, but yet to the left. Food enters through the cardioesophageal sphincter. Usually we call that the cardiac sphincter. It's just a muscular closure, kind of like when you make a fist and you look at the end of your fist. It's kind of like a muscular closure like that keeps what's in the stomach in the stomach. Then also at the bottom of the stomach we have another sphincter, another muscle that holds the food in the stomach, and that one's called the pyloric sphincter. Interestingly enough, with newborns, sometimes they'll have what's called pyloric spasms, meaning the emptying of their stomach doesn't happen correctly, and that will spasm and not allow food to go down into their in the other part of their digestive tract in the small intestine. And it usually causes all that milk to reverse. It's not something that is dangerous for the infant. It can be very dramatic for the parents when they have a little one that routinely spews their milk on people. But it's usually, there's a couple of tricks that you can do to kind of help with that. Sometimes you can't burp the little guys because it's just that act of picking them up and starting to burp them that causes the little pyloric spasms. They outgrow it, it's not something that's permanent. I have a very healthy 26-year-old that suffered that when he was a little guy, and he has no trouble eating. All right. There are some regions of the stomach we need to be familiar with. We have the cardial part, which is near the heart, kind of easy to remember. The fundus is the expanded portion or the rounded portion. It's going to be the part, just a big rounded part of it, the rounded part of the body of it. And then, of course, we have the mid portion. And then the funnel-shaped end of it is the pylorus. Okay? Stomach can stretch to hold about 4 liters or about a gallon of food when full. That's a lot. Unless you're one of those people that have trained to eat, like the hot dog eating contest. I have no idea how they fit that much food in their stomach, but they do. Apparently, there's a way that you train for that, kind of like Rocky, man. Only with food. Maybe I've been training with food for many years now. I don't know. Maybe that's the excuse that I can use. I don't think my wife will buy it. The rugae are internal folds of the mucosa inside of the stomach when it's empty. It's that rough-looking look to it. And then there's some external regions where we have the lesser curvature, the greater curvature. Those are more of just reference marks. Typically not something that we use in most of the medical fields, but surgeons, if you were a surgical nurse and that kind of thing, you would need to be familiar with some of this terminology, so maybe you know what the physicians are referring to. Okay, so we take a look at the stomach. We look at the fundus. We see the big round bulbed part there at the top, and then of course the body of it, the stomach is along there, and inside of the stomach we can see those the wrinkles inside of the stomach called the rugae mucosa. And when we eat more, those stretch out as the stomach stretches, and the wrinkles become less and less evident the more food that's in there. The stomach is muscular. It's a thing we need to realize. And you can also see that the muscles, there's different layers of muscles, and those muscles are going in different directions. That gives the stomach the ability to kind of churn the food in there. It kind of churns it around, and it mixes it with the acids and the digestive enzymes and all that stuff so that it can begin breaking down this food that we've ate. Take, for example, when we eat a really good steak. If you like steak, you eat a really good steak. Well, steak is meat. It's tough. It's got a lot of proteins in it and that kind of stuff. Well, in order for our body to benefit from what we ate, it has to be able to break that food down, or that meat down, that T-bone down into very small molecular parts, essentially. It's going to break it down into very small things that can be absorbed into the body. So what winds up being absorbed into our body is not steak, but it's the component parts of the steak that we ate, the proteins and the fats and even some of the sugars, if there's some sugars present, that are absorbed into the body. It's no longer steak because we've taken it completely apart. It's very similar to if you went outside and you got some wrenches and screwdrivers and took your car completely apart in the garage. Well, it's no longer a car. It is pieces of a car that you could put back together and make a car out of it, but I would bet that you could take those pieces and make something else that's not a car. So some things are going to be common to others. So when we break it apart, when our digestive system breaks it apart, it's no longer what it was when we took it in. And that's its job. That's what it does. The stomach is part of that process. It starts off with us chewing the food, kind of tearing it down, tearing it apart, shearing and cutting and tearing, lubricating it a little bit, starting with some enzymes in the mouth. Gets into the stomach, it chimes and churns and turns it around and around and around and around. Eventually gets it broken down enough that down here in the pylorus, the area where it goes into the small intestine, it begins to release some of that is broken down or is mixed with enough digestive juices that it can begin to move on to the next phase of breakdown and absorption. So that's what's going on. That's what's happening. Here is a real picture of a stomach. This is a cross section, and you can see up in here, all along in here, you can see the rugae, the wrinkling look of that stomach. So that's what it looks like. And of course, once it fills up with food, that wrinkling kind of goes away. Down here, we see the pyloral sphincter, or the pyloric sphincter, and the pylorus is down in that area. Sorry. Whoa, where'd it go? There it is. You draw a circle on there. Apparently, it goes 2 slides ahead. Okay, so the stomach also has all these layers. It's got the lesser and the greater omentum, and not to get real in depth into what those are. Basically, these are attachment points. We have this peritoneum that attaches and holds the stomach in place, and it refers to them as the greater and lesser omentum, and the way that it attaches and holds in place. It also embeds some fats in there, some fat cells to cushion. Not fat that we've ate. No, we're talking about fat cells that are stored on our body. I'm a perfect example of a very, very efficient fat storing machine. But in our gut, where our stomach and intestines and all that stuff are, we have this omentum that is part of the peritoneum, one of the layers of the peritoneum that holds everything together. It's a really fibrous kind of layer that kind of holds all of our organs in place where they're supposed to be. Also, there's some protection, some fat is stored in there that helps cushion and protect those organs. So the more fat that we see visible on the outside of someone's body, like belly fat and all that kind of stuff, the more fat there is actually stored around the organs inside of the body. Sometimes that's a bad thing too. There's fat stored around our heart, which is part of the protective features, but too much of it can be problematic. Okay? All right, so here's what I'm talking about. You see all this yellow stuff in here? This is a fibrous layer of connective tissue that's kind of holding all of those organs together. It's just this web of fibrous material that holds everything together. They've kind of cut it back over here where we can kind of see a little bit more of the small intestine, and then we can see the large intestine kind of peeking over here. Here's the cecum, which we'll talk about here in a second. Stomach, liver, gallbladder's peeking out from underneath there. Spleen's kind of hiding back over here. So we can kind of see how all of that's kind of fitting in there where they've cut somebody open along these sides right here, and the flap is actually down here where they flapped it back. Now, obviously, this person is someone that is deceased, and when they do surgery on somebody, it's far less dramatic than this. It's usually very small incisions, typically. All right. Like I said, holds food. It's a temporary storage tank for food, but it also starts to break down that food while it's in that storage tank, because it's temporary, because it's going to gradually begin to release its contents into the small intestine, but the small intestine can't take large doses at a time, so it's going to be small emboluses of food that's going down in there. So it starts that chemical breakdown, and it delivers chyme that once in the stomach, all that food that's mixed together with all those acids and enzymes and all that stuff that's breaking things down, it's mixed out all together, and that mixture is called chyme. And that's the processed food, and it's going to start to deliver that to the small intestines in small increments. Usually, the stomach's going to hold that food anywhere from about 4 to 6 hours before it completely empties. The mucosa of the stomach, that inner lining of the stomach, is that simple columnar epithelium, and then there's going to be some gastric pits on, intermixed with them. So if you want to jump back to about chapter 2 or 3 or whatever it was, so maybe it was 3, and look at the shape of that particular cells that are present there, you can, but there may be a picture on here, at least there's a picture in your book, and you'll go, oh yeah, I recognize those. These mucus cells produce a bicarbonate-rich alkaline mucus. And the reason why they produce a bicarbonate-rich alkaline mucus is to protect the cells. Because remember these gastric pits that I mentioned, those pits are actually releasing acid, hydrochloric acid predominantly. So we need some mucus, we need some bicarbonate-rich mucus to protect the cells from all the acid too. So these gastric glands or gastric pits contain all these glands that secrete gastric juices, including intrinsic factor, which we need to break down B12. There's some chief cells in there that produce some proteins, protein digesting enzymes. And then there's these parietal cells that produce hydrochloric acid. If you've ever had heartburn, it's because of these parietal cells that are producing this hydrochloric acid. Also, this is one of the places where where some of the medications that we take to eliminate stomach acid or heartburn, reduce that, affects these parietal cells and their production of hydrochloric acid. And then there's some enteroendocrine cells that produce hormones called gastrin, which is needed for part of that process. But here's those gastric pits. We can see some of the mucus cells in there, and then the parietal and the gastric glands and the chief cells. Chief cells are way down there at the bottom, so all that acid's got to come up to the top. And remember, this is just where these gastric juices are created in order to break down the foods that we take in, and there's probably millions or billions or trillions of them in there. Okay? Also, well, I thought it said that in there, but I know I mentioned that it takes about 4 to 6 hours for the stomach to empty after we've ate a meal. So that food is in our stomach for a while. So when you eat a meal and then you're hungry again in 2 hours, it's really probably more of a psychological thing. Of course, depending on what you've ate. It seems like you can eat Chinese food and be stuffed and 2 hours later be hungry again because it just doesn't stick with you. I don't get it. It's weird. The Chinese food industry has got it figured out, I guess. All right, so the small intestine is where all of the digestion really occurs. Remember, so far, all we've done is broke down food. We've just broke it down to where that it can be absorbed. Now we're going to start doing some work. It's the longest part of the alimentary canal, so it's the longest part of the digestive system. About 7 to 13 feet long. And I don't know why it says in a living person, about 7 to 13 feet long in a living person. I don't think that changes when a person dies. I think it's still probably 7 to 13 feet long in a non-living person as well, at least if they're freshly non-living. Anyway, it's the site where nutrient absorption occurs, where we absorb our nutrients into the bloodstream. It is a muscular tube that starts at the pyloric sphincter, the exit of the stomach, and it goes all the way to the ileocecal valve that enters the large intestine. So basically it goes from a sphincter to a valve. Valve actually just keeps things from going in the wrong direction. And of course it's held in place by that mesentery, that webby membrane that's inside of there. It holds everything in place and where it should be. We have 3 subdivisions of the small intestine. We have the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Those are all areas that it's good to be familiar with. It's good to be familiar with each one of those areas so when they're referenced later, you'll understand which part we're talking about. Duodenum attaches to the stomach and it curves around the head of the pancreas. The duodenum is actually the place where we see most ulcers. Most ulcers are all called stomach ulcers. Most of them are actually in the duodenum. That's usually where they're at. The stomach is used to high amounts of stomach acid. When we get high amounts of stomach acid in the duodenum, then we start to have problems if we don't neutralize that acid. It starts to eat holes in things, We can't have them in the stomach too, though. Don't think that we can't. A lot of times these are caused by maybe even a bacteria that may be present, especially in the stomach. But the peptic ulcers that they oftentimes refer to is usually in the duodenum. It may be solely in the duodenum too. I don't know for sure. But the jejunum attaches anterior to the duodenum. Well, basically, it goes from the duodenum to the jejunum to the ileum, and then the ileum connects to the large intestine. Okay? And it meets at the ileocecal valve. Chemical digestion starts in the small intestines. We have some enzymes that are produced there by some intestinal cells, as well as the pancreas. We have a pancreatic duct that carries enzymes into the duodenum. So we have the pancreas that's sitting really close. It's actually sitting almost right on top of the duodenum. And there's some ducts from the pancreas that empty digestive enzymes into the duodenum. So, and then of course we have some bile that's formed by the liver that enters to the duodenum via a bile duct. So the bile actually is needed to break down fats. Bile salts break down fats. And when your body senses that you've ate more fats, it will cause more bile to be released by the liver to begin to break those fats down. So we have pancreatic enzymes that are released right there in the duodenum, as well as bile that's released right there in the duodenum. So we're still trying to break things down, but we're going to start absorbing things really quickly too. Remember, this thing is 7 to 13 feet long. So still breaking things down in the beginning, going to start absorbing things here pretty quickly. Remember, the pancreas is an endocrine and an exocrine gland. Remember, it does things internally in the body. It excretes things into the bloodstream, such as insulin and those types of things. It's also an exocrine gland because it excretes things to the outside, external of the body, which means into the digestive tract. Remember, the digestive tract is external to the body. Still may be kind of weird to understand, but it is not internal. Internal means in the blood, in the tissues. This is external still. And of course, bile is stored in the gallbladder until it is needed. So that bile that is produced by the liver is stored in a little pouch that for future use. When it's needed, the gallbladder will contract and squeeze the bile out into the duodenum, where it can further kind of break down those fats that we've ingested. Problem is if you have one of them doggone things that's a little overactive or underactive, or if you got a stone inside of there, it's not going to release the bile like it's supposed to, and it's going to be painful. Oftentimes people with a gallbladder flare-up will have pain in their right shoulder, or even sometimes in the middle of their chest, like they're having chest pain, but they'll be absent some of the other symptoms that we normally associate with a heart attack. They may have nausea, they may have some chest pain. Usually they're not sweaty. They don't usually have pain in the left shoulder. Usually it's in the right. And usually we don't see anything on the heart monitor that would indicate that they're having a heart-related event. So that's a pretty good indication that maybe it's a gallbladder flare-up. Eventually, if it continues, they'll have to take it out. But that green thing looks like a pear hanging down here is the gallbladder. It's going to store that bile, and we see the tube down here that empties down in here, as well as it ties in with the pancreatic ducts. This thing sticking out all the way out here is the pancreas. And they're going to empty their juices, or their digestive enzymes and bile salts, into the small intestine. Of course, the stomach attaches right there. So there's a few structural modifications that helps to increase the surface area of the small intestine so that it can better absorb food. One of them is the microvilli. It's these little finger-like projections of the membrane that stick up. And the villi, of course, the villi are finger-like projections. So microvilli are tiny projections of the membrane that stick up. So we have folds of the membrane that stick up. And the villi are the finger-like projections that stick up that give us a higher surface area. And then we have the folds that make it deeper. So we have the villi sticking up, the microvilli, and all that stuff. But all of this creates, down in here, it creates much more surface area for absorption of those nutrients as it passes through there. So with all of this, this is where we're talking about absorption. So we're going to see this in the small intestine because it's all about absorption. Of course, up here we can see the muscles that go different directions. And that is to help push food through the digestive tract in that same peristaltic motion, in that wave kind of motion as it's pushing it through there, only it's much slower in the small intestine. And then it gets slower again in the large intestine. So we see these finger-like projections that stick up, and we've got all these cells that are located inside of them with, you can see here that there's blood vessels, and there's also a lymphatic vessel located in there too. So even the lymphatic vessel can absorb some nutrients that's coming out of this as well. So lymphatic system is still playing a major role. Remember, the lymphatic system is also an early detection system. So if it picks up something that doesn't belong that we've absorbed, it can notify the immune system to respond accordingly because of what it has detected. All right. Large intestines, bigger in diameter, shorter in length, about 1.5 meters. Extends from the ileocecal valve, or from the end of the small intestine, all the way out to exit the body. The divisions of that include the cecum, the appendix, the colon, the rectum, and the anal canal. So it's broken up into different sections. Oftentimes we hear it referred to as ascending colon, transverse colon, and descending colon. So where it exits out of the small intestine, it becomes the ascending colon, and then when it goes up to the top and crosses over from one side of the body to the other, it's the transverse. And then descending as it's going out towards to exit the body. So the first part of it is the sac-like part called the cecum, and then we've got the appendix there. They're still not really sure what that thing is for, but there's some ideas out there of what it was for, what it is for. There's the latest that I've heard is that they believe it may be part of our immune system. It may be more of an immune system organ, kind of detecting what's going on in the large intestine, because what happens in the large intestine, or the colon, oftentimes the large intestine is referred to as the colon, is important. It may not seem like it's very important, but it's very important. A lot of important things happen there. So the colon, of course, I said ascending, transverse, descending, and then we have the sigmoid as the S region as it enters the pelvis. So And of course, the sigmoid has the rectum and the anal canal. All that's located in the pelvis. It ends at the anus, and of course, that is the opening of the large intestine, and that's where all the stuff that our body didn't use is gotten rid of, all the solid waste products. These sphincters that kind of hold everything in where it's supposed to be are closed until we decide that we need to defecate and go number 2. That is actually a function that we can control. It's one of the functions of the digestive system that we can control. It's a good thing that we can control that. Just trust me on it. Think about it for a minute and you'll agree. The large intestine delivers that food that we can't digest and to the body's exterior so we can get rid of it. Oftentimes people wonder, why does the food that we eat end up smelling like it does when we get rid of it? Well, in the large intestine, in the colon, there is a lot of bacteria in there. Oddly enough, yes, there is bacteria inside of our bodies, but remember, it's still external to our body. Remember, because it's in the digestive tract, it's still external. So this bacteria that is inside of there helps with some of the breakdown and digestive process of those food solids that are in there, and it helps us absorb some of the vitamins that are present in those substances. So this large intestine, its goal is to absorb vitamins. Down here's the sigmoid, by the way, this little S shape. So it absorbs some vitamins along the way, which that bacteria helps with. And it also reabsorbs all the water, as much water as it can back out of it. I'm sure all of you have probably heard about probiotics, where we take an antibiotic to get rid of bacteria, right? A probiotic actually helps keep bacteria alive, but they're somewhat selective in the bacteria that they help keep alive, and they're designed to help keep healthy bacteria, good bacteria, alive in our digestive tract. So bacteria should be there. Bacteria is helpful. Unfortunately, bacteria, the waste product of bacteria, doesn't smell very good. It's very sulfury and that kind of thing, and that's part of what gives our human waste the smell that it has. And that's why with other animals or other species, their waste may have a different odor to it. It's because of the different bacteria that their digestive systems need to contain. So it's interesting. Ascending colon, transverse colon, descending colon, sigmoid. All right? Rectum, and then, of course, the anal canal. All right? We have these goblet cells inside the large intestine. They help produce some mucus to lubricate the passage of that feces as it's traveling through. And then with this muscular layer that's in there, it's reduced to just 3 bands of muscles. And these bands of muscles cause the wall to create these pocket-like sacs to kind of pucker in and push things through. It's very slow, only about 2 to 4 contractions a day of the large intestine to kind of move things. Moves things very slowly because it waits. It's kind of like a packing station, where it waits and it kind of packs, and then moves it forward a little bit. Packs some more, moves it forward a little bit, and it's reabsorbing water in the process of doing that. Okay? The accessory organs that we're going to talk about that are associated with the digestive system are the teeth, the salivary glands, or salivary, I never can say it right, pancreas, liver, and the gallbladder. We've talked about the pancreas before, so it won't be a whole lot to talk about there, and we're not going to get real crazy in depth into all of these, but the teeth are something that's important for us to know about. It breaks down and chews food into smaller fragments to make it easier to be broken down in the stomach. 2 sets of teeth during our lifetime. Unfortunately, we're not shark. We only get 2 sets of teeth, where shark have, I don't know, they have a lot. By about age 2, babies have 20 teeth. And the first teeth appear are the lower the two up here are the lower central incisors. What's funny about it, those first teeth come in, baby teeth or milk teeth, those first teeth come in, they're always perfect. And you've got this little baby and they're adorable. They're a year old or a year and a half old, and they've got these beautifully straight teeth. They're just wonderful. And then there's teeth start coming out, and those other ones start growing in, and they're growing all weird directions and going crazy, and you're like, great. Guess we are going to have to go to the orthodontist. Yeah. So those teeth start to be replaced with permanent teeth around the age of 6 through about the age of 12. And then we have the full set of adult teeth, which is 32 teeth. Some people don't have all of their wisdom teeth. I'm one of those. I was fortunate, only had 2 come in. But 32 teeth is the normal amount. So if you see a test question, remember 32 teeth. 32. Don't sit there while you are taking your test counting the teeth in your mouth. That'll take too much time. Wisdom teeth, if they do show up, it's usually between the age of 17 and 25 is when those things usually start to come through. Incisors are cutting teeth. Canines or our eye teeth are for tearing and piercing. Premolars are for grinding, and molars are for grinding. So sharper the tooth, the more it is for cutting and tearing. The flatter the tooth, the more it is for grinding things. 2 regions of a tooth, crown and the root. We'll look at those in a little more detail. The crown is the exposed part that we can see above the gum, the gingiva. We have enamel that covers the crown. Below that we have some dentin, which forms the bulk of the tooth and surrounds the pulp cavity where the nerve runs. The pulp cavity has some connective tissue, blood vessels, and nerve fibers, and that's the thing that makes our teeth hurt, is those nerve fibers that are located in there. The root canal is where the pulp cavity extends to the root. So when you go to the doctor and they do a root canal, not only do they go into the pulp cavity, but they also go down the canals and extract the nerve that's running down those. The neck of it is a connector between the crown and the root, and that's right at the gum line. It's where the neck of it is. At the root, there's a cement that covers the outer surface and attaches the tooth to the periodontal membrane, or the ligament that holds the tooth in, and that membrane holds the tooth into the jaw. What's interesting about it is we can lose a tooth and actually replace it, and it will hold back in place. Sometimes we can save teeth, though we probably don't save the nerve to that tooth, but the blood vessels and all that stuff will reattach if we get the tooth back in the socket soon enough. And this periodontal membrane, the ligament, will actually hold that tooth in place. So this is the pulp cavity way up here, and this is the dentin, this blue stuff. And then down in here, this is the canal of it. So when the doctor does a root canal, they drill a hole in the tooth, clear out most of this canal, and then they run a metal rod or a little metal piece of metal down into this tooth down here. And then they take an x-ray of it to make sure that they've gotten all the way down the tooth, down that root canal of that tooth, so that the nerve ending is gone. And then they fill this back in with some sort of something to keep, so there's not just an empty space in there. And all this needs to be done sterilely so we don't have an infection. If they do it right, there's a low risk of infection. However, if they don't do it correctly, we can get an infection that can literally cause someone to have a heart attack. A dental infection can cause a mild heart attack. Seems weird, but it can. I had a 20-something-year-old friend a while back that had that happen to. He's fine, but it was a little scary there for a little bit. He decided that he probably shouldn't mess with an abscessed tooth and he should just go to the doctor. And then we got these salivary glands, or slobber glands as I like to call them. They actually empty some secretions into the mouth, like the parotoid glands, the submandibular glands, and the sublingual glands. They put moisture into the mouth to kind of moisturize the food to make it easier to swallow. also start some digestive enzymes in there that starts to begin to help break things down. So it's a mixture of mucus and serous fluid. Moisten and bind the food together in a mass or a bolus. It has this amylase in it that starts to help that digestion. And it helps also to dissolve the chemicals that will help us be able to taste things. Pancreas, we've talked about that. It's found in that parietal peritoneal space, mostly in the retroperitoneal, meaning kind of towards the back. And it extends across the abdomen from the spleen to the duodenum. So it kind of stretches across there. All kinds of digestive enzymes that doggone thing produces. And it drops them into the duodenum. The alkaline fluid that is produced with enzymes neutralizes acetic chyme coming from the stomach. So it's going to neutralize the acids that are coming out of the stomach. And then remember the internal hormones that it produces, such as insulin and glucagon, are released into the bloodstream. So that's the endocrine part of the pancreas. And the digestive part is the exocrine part. So we see another picture of that pancreas. That's why I left it in there so we could look at it again. See how far it extends all the way back over here. Liver is the largest gland in the body, located on the right side under the diaphragm. 4 lobes suspended from the diaphragm, and there is ligaments that actually hold the liver in place. Those ligaments actually are part of what makes up the lobes because of the way that they wrap around that. And also whenever there's a large shearing force placed on the body, like a fast stop from a car accident or a lateral impact from getting hit in the side of a car or something like that, that can tear the liver, it's because it tears right along those ligaments that holds the liver in place. So you can lacerate a liver because of the ligaments there without actually having anything puncture the abdomen or directly hit the abdomen. You can lacerate the liver because of the ligaments that hold it in place. All right. And of course, there's a gallbladder down there underneath there that has a common hepatic duct attached to it, which we'll talk about that gallbladder here in a little bit. We can see that little gallbladder sticking down here, but you see this division here of the liver and this division here. Some of these divisions are along the lines you can actually see that ligament right there. And this is oftentimes where that liver will tear. The liver has really good regenerative properties. So you can donate a part of your liver and it will actually grow inside of somebody else, or you can lose part of your liver and be replaced and it regenerate and regrow. It just takes time. It's not something that happens quickly. It takes time, and while that's regenerating and regrowing, you're going to be restricted on some of the things that you're going to be able to consume. Bile is produced by liver cells. It leaves through that common hepatic duct and then into the duodenum through the bile duct. It's a yellow-green solution that has bile salts and pigments. Also, it has some cholesterol, phospholipids, and electrolytes in that too. Bile actually helps to emulsify fats and break those larger fat globules into smaller ones so that they can actually be absorbed into the body and used for a purpose. Now the gallbladder, it's just that little sac found underneath the liver. When nothing's going on, no digestion's going on, it'll fill up with those bile salts and hold them. When fatty food is detected, bile is introduced in the duodenum from the gallbladder. It'll squeeze, there'll be a contraction of that gallbladder and it'll squeeze it right out. The problem is if there's a gallstone that's blocking the bile duct, or if the gallbladder is malfunctioning in some way, things don't work properly and it can be painful, nauseating. Before I had my gallbladder out, I was on applesauce for about 30 days and it was still painful before they finally got the doggone thing out. The good news is I lost about 35 or 40 pounds. The bad news is I found all of them and put every one plus a few more back on. So there's that little gallbladder peeking its head out from underneath the liver. Now granted, this shows a lot of space in between these organs. There's no space in there. Those are packed in there pretty tight. So there's another picture of it, the little pear-shaped thing. When they have to go in there and remove the gallbladder, they just remove it typically from here, leave this bile duct intact. Sometimes we'll get a gallstone in this duct here, and they'll just take the gallbladder completely out. So, what's the digestive system do? digest and absorb. So we take the food into our body, we propel it through the body through peristalsis, which we've talked about. Here's the action of moving it through the body, kind of like a wave up here is what I was talking about. And then we start to break it down, mechanically break it down. The food is mechanically broken down by the mouth and the stomach, and even parts of the small intestine from some of the chemicals that we've, or from the movement actually. It's mechanical breakdown. And then we start to chemically break it down with enzymes and bile salts and all those kinds of things. Depending on what it is we're breaking down will determine the enzyme that's needed to do that. Carbohydrates are broken down into monosaccharides or simple sugars. Proteins are broken down into amino acids. Fats are broken down into fatty acids and glycerol. So depending on what it is will determine what's going to be used to break it down and what it's going to be broken down into. And then we start to absorb it. The whole purpose of breaking all that stuff down is to absorb it. And we can absorb it into the bloodstream or, as I pointed out, into the lymphatic system because we have some lymphatic vessels running along in there in the digestive tract too. So it has to enter the body either through the blood or lymph capillaries in order for it to get into the body. What we don't use, we defecate out of our bodies in the form of feces and get rid of it. So we can kind of see from this picture, we take it in, turn it around, break it down, absorb it, get rid of what we can't use, and move on to the next meal. It's lunchtime now. No, kidding. No, it's not lunchtime. It's actually after lunch right now for me, but I don't know what time it is for you. So what happens in the mouth, the pharynx and the esophagus? We've talked about this as the food is placed in the mouth. It's physically broken down, mixed with saliva. Some amylase, cellular amylase begins to break down starch. And essentially no food absorption occurs in the mouth. We get it into the stomach, food is propelled down through peristalsis, through the pharynx, past the pharynx, down into the esophagus, still once again through peristalsis, and it's kind of a voluntary thing whether or not we swallow food. Remember though, you can't breathe while you're swallowing food. That's a good thing to remember because if you try to, you'll inhale your food and that's not a good thing. It'll make you cough and people will look at you funny. And then from the pharyngeal esophageal phase, food is moved on down through that. And like I said, some of this stuff I'm just going to go through quickly. And we see a picture of the bolus moving down here. Chew it up, swallow it. You notice the epiglottis is firmly closed. Springs back open. This closes back down here. Food goes down into the stomach, and this is part of the peristalsis kind of pushing things down. Okay, so that's how that's working. In the stomach, gastric juices are regulated by neural and hormonal factors that vary depending on what's going on. The presence of food or a rising pH, a more alkalinic pH, remember rising pH is alkaline, causes the release of the hormone gastrin. And gastrin causes stomach glands to produce digestive enzymes, mucus, and hydrochloric acid, which will then lower that pH. So that's what it's trying to do because it says, hey, food's here. That's why the pH is low. The hydrochloric acid makes the stomach contents very acidic. Hydrochloric acid on your skin would burn badly. This acidic pH activates a few things to happen. It activates the pepsin protein for digestion, provides a hostile environment for microorganisms, so it'll kill off a lot of bacteria. That's why, they say the 5-second rule when you drop something on the floor, which is not true, by the way. But the 5-second rule, when you do pick it up off the floor and pop it in your mouth, there's probably bacteria on it, even in 5 seconds. They've kind of proven that. But fortunately, the stomach acids kind of help protect us from a lot of those bacteria, not all of them. It won't kill all of them. So then we have these digestive enzymes, pepsin and renin. They start to digest things. Renin works to digest milk proteins in infants and not adults. So as we get older, we're not very good at digesting milk proteins. Some of us are not good at all, so we can't even have lactate or lactin. So we don't digest it well anymore after we reach a certain age. Some of us, like me, are very lucky, can drink all kinds of milk, which I like to do, so it's good. The only thing absorbed in the stomach is alcohol and aspirin. are about the only things absorbed. Alcohol is readily and quickly absorbed, and it goes straight to the liver. That's why repeated alcohol abuse causes liver damage, because that's where it goes, stomach to liver. Waves kind of push things along, the peristalsis. It grinds all that stuff together and then pushes it out in small quantities through the pyloric valve into the duodenum. And eventually, like I said, that will empty out in about 4 to 6 hours. I thought that, yeah, there it is right there, 4 to 6 hours. I knew it wasn't crazy. So eventually the stomach will empty out in about 4 to 6 hours. There's some enzymes there in the small intestine once it gets there. There's enzymes that break double sugars into simple sugars. Some proteins are broken down in there. Pancreatic enzymes help complete digestion for all the different types of food that we take in. There's some alkalinity. The pancreatic enzymes and the pancreatic juices that are released gives some alkalinity, so it reduces or neutralizes the acid content of the things that are coming from the stomach, so that it's safer and it won't damage the small intestine. This release of juices from the pancreas is stimulated by the vagus nerves, the nerves that attach to the stomach that says, hey, look, there's food here. So things start to get set into motion as bits of food are actually being released from the stomach into the small intestine, and then the pancreatic juices are then released as well. All right. Let's see. We have some hormones, the secretin and CCK. They target liver and gallbladder to release bile too, so some bile's kicked in if there's fats present. And then, of course, there's all of these hormones. There's a summary of those, and I took the pictures out of here. They're in your book, so you can look at all those hormones that are present. I'm not going to test you on them specifically. So water, we start to reabsorb water along the length of the intestine. By the end of the digestive cycle, most of the products are absorbed through active transport through the cell membranes. Lipids are actually absorbed by diffusion. Some things are transported into the liver by the portal vein. And of course, we're still moving food by peristalsis, so that's slow move, and it's segmental movements. It kind of mixes the chyme with the digestive juices and aids in propelling food, so it's not just a continual, constant thing. It's kind of segmental, a little bit here, a little bit there. If you ever had a rumbly tummy, it'll kind of it'll rumble a little bit, and then a little bit later it'll rumble a little more, and then it'll rumble a little more. It doesn't do it constantly. It's just because it's segmental. In the large intestine, no enzymes are produced. The bacteria in there helps produce some vitamin K and B. A lot of gases are released by this bacteria, and they're not so pleasant gases at that. And then there's some water, and vitamins K and B are absorbed in this area too. What's left over is unusable, and it is eliminated. The contents of that, of course, are undigested food residues, mucus, bacteria, and some water. Got to have enough water in there so that it's not completely dry and it can be eliminated through the body. So in the large intestine, it's called sluggish peristalsis because, like I said, it only happens about 3 to 4 times a day. I think I said 2, but it's 3 to 4 times a day. So when the food residue arrives, it's some contractions in the large intestine happen, and those movements, like I said, are slow. They're pretty powerful, but they're slow. And most of the time, when we have that gurgly stomach or that, that really, stomach pain, a lot of times it is the large intestine that's causing that. And of course, the presence of this feces in the rectal area causes the reflex for us to want to go to the bathroom. So when the what do they call it, the vault that holds all of that before we eliminate it begins to get full, we'll get the urge to go to the bathroom. Fortunately, like I said, it is an urge that we can control. Most of the foods that we take in are metabolized as fuel, and they're used to create ATP, which is a good thing. Not all of them are, but most of what we take in is we use to create energy for the cells, ATP. Remember we talked about ATP in depth. So the major nutrients that we're looking to get out of the food that we take in are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and water. Some minor things, of course, are vitamins and minerals that we want to get out of that food too. But the top things being the carbohydrates, because that's what we're going to convert into fuel. So carbohydrates are the sugars and starches that we take in from the plants and fruits and vegetables that we eat. The one exception, of course, is lactose from milk and small amounts of glycogens from some of the meats that we take in. Lipids are saturated fats from animal products, unsaturated fats from nuts and seeds and vegetable oils, and cholesterol from milk yolks, eggs, and milk products and that kind of thing. Then we've got proteins, have all these amino acids. We get that from animal products, eggs, meat, poultry, fish. There's some essential amino acids, the ones that the body can't make and must be obtained from our diet that we need to eat. So if you're a vegetarian, you need to make sure that you're getting a diet that has the essential amount of amino acids, because without them, your body cannot rebuild and reproduce and grow and do those things that it needs to do. Of course, legumes and beans also have some proteins, but they're not complete proteins, so they're not great. Vitamins are used as coenzymes, and we find most of those in our fruits and vegetables that we eat. And of course, minerals are important for enzyme activity. Vegetables, legumes, milk, and some meats are rich in minerals. Iron is important for making hemoglobin, so we got to have plenty of iron. Calcium is important for building bone, blood clotting, secretion activities, and all that kind of stuff, muscle contractions. We talked about that when we talked about muscles. So two different things we reference when we're talking about metabolism. The first is catabolism, where substances are broken down, and anabolism is where molecules are built up or things are built up. Catabolism is breaking down, anabolism is building up, two terms that you probably need to remember because you'll probably see them again. Okay, so carbohydrate metabolism, where we take carbohydrates and we break them down, and that way we can use them to produce ATP, or the energy that we need. Glucose is what's referred to as blood sugar. It is the major thing that is broke down from carbohydrates of digestion is glucose. And this glucose is used to make ATP, right? Stick with me, I know you've heard it before. Remember we talked about cellular respiration? When glucose is oxidized, and we add oxygen, and then carbon dioxide, water, and ATP are formed. So we oxidize glucose, we have all these other things that are formed. It is simply the Krebs cycle. There's 3 phases of this mechanism. We talked about the Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle and all that stuff. We've talked about all these. Remember, glycolysis is what happens when we take a glucose molecule and we split it into 2 pyruvic acid molecules and yield a little bit of ATP, but we can take those pyruvic acid molecules and we can put them into the Krebs cycle and produce a little more ATP. And then we take those products from that we got from the Krebs cycle and we put them in the electron transport chain and produce a whole bunch of ATP. We talked about all this in an earlier chapter, and I talked about it then for a reason, because by the time we got to here, there would be a lot of questions about what's going on and how we're using energy and what is this ATP stuff. Remember, this is just a review. Feel free to go back to that chapter and watch that video, or those videos that we had there about the production of ATP, and you can see where the absorption of carbohydrates and breaking them down into glucose and all that stuff, how it yields ATP. But it's not anything new. It's not nothing new that we've talked about to this point. If we have a condition called hyperglycemia, it's abnormally high levels of glucose in the blood. Normal level of glucose is 80 to 100. Outside of those ranges, we can be 120 or that kind of thing, or 140, but usually get up around 150, we start to call it high. When we have excesses of glucose, those usually are converted into a fat cell and stored. Unfortunately, sometimes we can have excessive levels of glucose because we don't have enough insulin to metabolize it and to use it within our bodies. And glucose levels honestly can get up over 1,000. a very, very, very high. When they get that high, they're very dangerous because glucose in the body, free floating in the body, can be damaging or is damaging to tissues, and it'll start to damage the tissues pretty significantly. Hypoglycemia, or low levels of glucose in the blood, is caused by us using up too much glucose or not taking in enough glucose, either from too much insulin. If you're a diabetic and you take too much insulin, it can cause low blood sugar, or not eating enough can cause low blood sugar as well, or not eating enough of what you should be eating. Fats are good insulators of the body. They're also a good way to long-term store energy for long periods of time. Excess fats that we take in, of course, are stored in subcutaneous tissue and other fat deposits around the body. When carbohydrates are and we've got tons of them in unlimited supply, more of the fats are oxidized to produce ATP. When we don't have enough carbohydrates, when there's not enough carbohydrates, we'll start to break down fats to oxidize and create ATP. The problem with doing this is we wind up with a byproduct, an acid byproduct called a ketone. And that acid byproduct is acetic, and as it builds up, we can wind up with a condition called diabetic ketoacidosis, where they have a high blood sugar, or they have a high amount of these ketones in the body. They have a fruity breath, like juicy fruit smell to them. It's not uncommon to see this when somebody's eating a no-carb diet, or their diabetes isn't controlled, because they may have a high blood sugar, they may have a large amount of glucose in the body, but they don't have any insulin to actually use the glucose, so the liver starts to break down fats that are more readily used to produce energy, and those breakdown of fats actually releases ketones, which is an acid, and that buildup of acid winds up giving in a condition called diabetic ketoacidosis. Even though there's a high blood sugar, it seems kind of odd that we would have both of them occurring in the same person, but that's typically where we see it, is with diabetes. Of course, starvation can cause that as well, cause them to build up. These proteins, it's important for us to break down and absorb proteins because it's what we need for our cell structures. We make sure that we conserve those. Our bodies naturally try to hang on to proteins and conserve them because they're so badly needed for cells in the body. And then, of course, we take up some of these essential amino acids from the blood by the body cells, that we use these essential amino acids to build the proteins that we need. These amino acids are oxidized to form ATP, mainly when other fuel sources are not available. So unfortunately, sometimes we have to use amino acids in ways that are not good, and it's not healthy for our bodies, because then our bodies can't create cells and repair cells like it needs to. What happens though when we use these amino acids, we release ammonia when these are catabolized. This is detoxified by the liver cells that combine it with carbon dioxide to form urea, which we urinate out of our bodies. So a certain amount of this is normal, but excessive amounts is not a good thing if we're having to metabolize protein in that way to use for ATP. So the liver is the body's key metabolic organ. It's the key organ that does stuff. And what we do during the digestive process is manufacture bile, detoxify drugs and alcohol from the body. The role of digestion with the liver is makes bile, detoxifies, degrades hormones. After a hormone's been released and it needs to be not in the body anymore, it'll pick up those hormones and get rid of them. Produces cholesterol, blood proteins and all that stuff, plays a central role in metabolism. It can regenerate. Backing up a couple of steps here, it produces cholesterol. It's responsible for the majority of cholesterol that's produced in the body. And I think a slide says that here in a minute, so I'll just stop talking about it. It also helps maintain homeostasis of blood glucose levels through glycogenesis, glycogenolysis, and glycogenesis. It does it in several different ways. by using glucogen and glycogen to create sugars or break down sugars. There's many of the fats and fatty acids that are picked up by the liver. Some of them are oxidized. The rest are either stored or broken down and gotten rid of. The cholesterol. Cholesterol is not used to make ATP, so you think, what's the use? But cholesterol is essential. It's actually the structural basis for steroid hormones and vitamin D, but it's a building block of plasma membranes. You know, those membranes outside of the cell, the plasma membrane, that's the membrane of a cell. It is the building block of plasma membrane. So cholesterol sometimes sounds like it's the big enemy. You know, we have to control the cholesterol, and we have to take this cholesterol pill, and you've got to keep your cholesterol below this level. It is essential in the body as well. So while too much cholesterol can be a bad thing, there is a range that's normal and a healthy range, because not enough cholesterol can be much more dangerous than too much. Most cholesterol, about 85% of it, is produced in the liver. Only about 15% of it is in our diet. So the first thing your doctor will tell you is you need to watch what you eat so we can get your cholesterol down. 90% of the time they know that's not going to work, and they're going to have to put you on something that's going to control how much cholesterol your liver produces. And that's the statins drugs that you hear about. All right. Cholesterol and fatty acids can't freely circulate in the bloodstream, so they have to be controlled. So they're transported by lipoproteins known as LDLs and HDLs. And those LDLs and HDLs are actually what we measure when we're measuring lipids or measuring cholesterol amounts, LDLs and HDLs, because we can measure those. And that gives us a picture of what's going on cholesterol-wise. LDLs, low density, rated as bad. Lipoproteins, since they can lead to atherosclerosis or buildup of plaque in your arteries. High density, those are the good ones, they say. Those are the good ones because they're going to get broke down and eliminated. So a high level of LDLs is not good, but a high level of HDLs is good. It's not what you would think, but that's the way it is. You would think that it'd be the other way around. All right, so our our food intake needs to balance that of our energy output, unless what we're trying to do is lose weight. So if we're trying to lose weight, we need to take in less energy than we are burning in a given day, so that our body begins to break down stored energy instead of us eating more and taking in more than what we're burning in a day, which causes our body to store those things that we don't need. So these things can interfere with how our body balances those things. Our body's weight is usually relatively stable. Most of the time our intake and our output are equally balanced, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes there's some medical issues that go on that can mess with how our body does those things. Mechanisms that may regulate the food intake is the level of nutrients in our blood, what our body is demanding, hormones, body temperature, psychological factors. One of the things that I've read, and I don't know how true it is, so don't take it as gospel, but one of the things that I've read is they say about 70% of the population, when they get those hunger pains, even though they've ate a meal, or they get that, hey, I'm hungry and I know I just ate 2 hours ago and I shouldn't be hungry, but I am, so I'm going to eat. They say most of the time, with about 70% of the population, it's thirst. That 70% of us, our brains can't distinguish the difference between hunger and thirst. I'm not really sure if I believe that or not, or where my body lies on that, but I want to think that that's what it is. But I've tried drinking gallons of water instead of eating, and what happens is I'll drink all this water and I'll still be hungry, and I'll eat something, and then I'll wind up being up 3 or 4 times in the middle of the night going to the bathroom. So it didn't really seem to get me anywhere. But that's some of the things that they're saying, is sometimes our body's craving water. I do know this, that the majority of us walking around are dehydrated. We don't drink enough water. So different nutrients yield different amounts of energy. And the way we measure the value of energy is in calories. Carbohydrates and proteins yield 4 calories per gram, and fats yield 9 calories per gram. So when they take a food and they determine how many carbohydrates and how many fats are in that, then they can tell us the calorie amount of that based on how many grams that food weighs. And that's how they do that. That's the way they measure that. And then we have these metabolic rates. We have the basal metabolic rate, the amount of heat that's produced by the body per unit at time of rest. And then the average is about 60 to 72 calories an hour for an average 154-pound adult. Good luck finding a 154-pound male adult in Oklahoma. Average factors that influence that rate is body surface area, gender, age, and of course the amount of some things that are produced inside of the body, such as thyroxine. More thyroxine means a higher metabolic rate. The total metabolic rate, the total amount of calories the body must consume to fuel ongoing activities. This is going to be dramatically affected with any kind of muscular activity that's going on. That total metabolic rate must equal the calories consumed in order for weight to stay consistent. If that total metabolic rate drops below what we are consuming, then we're going to pack on some pounds. Or if we start if our metabolic rate is higher than what we are consuming, then we're actually going to lose some weight. So total metabolic rate's important. Breaking down of all these foods, breaking down and oxidizing these foods produces heat. This heat is good because we're warm-blooded and we need to maintain heat. However, the body needs to maintain that temperature within a certain range, 96 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or 96 and 100. It must maintain that in there. That's a normal range. So the body's got all these mechanisms that are going to come into play when that temperature starts to get outside of that range. What it's going to do to try to cool off will break out in a sweat, or blood vessels will dilate, those kinds of things to try to cool off, to maintain that. Body's thermostat, of course, is still the hypothalamus. We talked about that back in the brain. And it initiates all these mechanisms to maintain heat, either to get rid of heat or to save heat. Vasodilation to get rid of heat, vasoconstriction to hold on to heat into the vital areas. That kind of stuff is what that hypothalamus will do. Fever is controlled hyperthermia, is what they call it anyway. Infection, cancer, allergic reactions, brain injuries can cause us to run a fever. It happens when the body's thermostat gets set too high. Problem is body's needed proteins may start to break apart and break down. Permanent brain damage can occur if it gets too high. All right, so some of the developmental aspects of the digestive system and metabolism, we're just going to kind of whiz through these pretty quickly. Remember, the alimentary canal is continuous, and after about the 5th week of development, we can see that in the embryo. We start to see some of these digestive glands budding, but remember, the fetus is still receiving all the nutrients through the placenta directly into their bloodstream. So their digestive system does not need to be working. It's kind of like the respiratory system doesn't need to be working. And to a small degree, their heart really doesn't need to be working all that hard yet, but it will start beating. But newborns, feeding must be frequent because peristalsis is inefficient. It doesn't move things through the digestive system well. Vomiting is pretty common. And this is why newborns should not eat solid foods, is because newborns and even babies up to a certain age should not eat solid foods because their digestive system is not ready for it. They can't push it through their digestive system, and there's a greater likelihood that there'll be a bowel obstruction somewhere along the way because peristalsis is not working. So it's not just because your doctor's being mean, it's because it could be dangerous for your child, is why we don't feed them solid foods until they've reached usually about a year of age. There are some congenital defects that can hamper nutrition. One of them is cleft palate, cleft lip, and tracheoesophageal fistula, where we have some growth abnormalities. There's some common inborn errors of metabolism. PKU and cystic fibrosis are those, a couple of those. Reflexes newborns have that help them get through life. These are just natural reflexes, something they don't have to be taught. It's the rooting reflex. It helps infants nurse, and then the suckling reflex allows them to be able to continue nursing while they're doing that. They also have the palmar reflex. You put something in the palm of their hand, they'll grab a hold of it. Those are all normal reflexes. Teething begins around the age of 6 months. So them little guys can start chewing on stuff that you don't want them chewing on at about 6 months old. There are some problems that we can have. Some gastrointestinal inflammations can occur at any time. There's some diverticulitis and all kinds of stuff like that that can happen, appendicitis. As we get older, our metabolism decreases. Sometimes we'll have some ulcers in middle age, some gallbladder problems. I've had them both. Yeah, I've lived a full life. Some later problems, later middle age problems, obesity. Thank goodness I haven't had diabetes. Activity of the digestive tract in old age. Fewer digestive juices are created. The movement through the digestive tract starts to slow down. Diverticulosis and diverticulitis, gastrointestinal cancers, and those things start to become more common. And that's why they go in after a certain age of like 50, you have to go in for colonoscopies or that kind of thing. Thank goodness they've come up with a new test, and I'm hoping that that starts to become a little bit more mainstream before I have to go in for colonoscopies. But anyway, that's chapter 14. Yeah, that's chapter 14. I will see you guys back at chapter 15.